The Diabetes Podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease. Please do not apply any of this information without first speaking to your doctor.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Diabetes Podcast. I'm Dr. Garrett, and with us is again Dr. Grady Dr. What's up, Grady?
Not a whole lot. Excited to talk about some more blood sugar and stress.
Blood sugar and stress, yes. Today we're going to be talking about some how stress can affect high blood sugar and just talk a little bit more about hyperglycemia. And actually, while recording this episode specifically, I have a family member who is type 1 diabetic and has a lot of complications and is actually in surgery right now with trying to save her life and because of her type 1 diabetic complications. So, I almost want to dedicate this episode and almost just kind of reattest that our podcast here isn't just it's to have fun and talk about diabetes, but what we deal with on an everyday basis is real. Mm-hmm. And if you're struggling and you don't have the right team with you, best thing to do is just start today. There's so many little things that you can do, and you don't have to be burdened with this condition, but this condition is real bitch. And so I just want to dedicate this, as we're about to talk about chronic high and hyperglycemia, to everyone that has struggled and continues to struggle with this condition, because it's real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. It's a tough one, and we're all going through it together, and we're all learning together. And that's kind of the goal of what we're doing here, is trying to get some information out there so that way people can start helping themselves and hopefully avoid those severe complications later in life.
Yeah. So that being said, let's talk about, I'm not sure if it's a happier note, but the dawn phenomenon. What the heck is that? And this might be a term that type 1s might hear all the time, or maybe not. What the heck what does that even mean?
Yeah. I think I heard this term after I knew like the technical part of it. I'd never heard it before, and then somebody used it, and I'm like, what is that? And so basically what the dawn phenomenon is that when you wake up, so dawn of the day, your blood sugar tends to spike during that morning time. Some people it's really early, some people it's later, but that has everything to do with stress and cortisol. So basically cortisol is what really drives that up in the morning. That's because you've just gone 8+ hours without eating. And now your body is getting into that lower blood sugar range and or kind of starvation mode, and your body's trying to wake you up so you can go kill something and eat it. And so it's increasing the stress in your body. We're getting you into that stress state so you have more energy, like I said, to wake up, find something or kill something so you can eat it and get back into that rest and digest state. And so cortisol, like we've talked about before, raises your blood sugar. It does that by breaking down protein to make glucose, primarily protein. And so when we get that spike in the morning for that morning cortisol, then we see a spike in blood sugar as a result. So it doesn't have a lot to do with like the fact that you ate something or didn't eat something. But it does have a relationship to the amount of stress you're under. So typically we see the more stress you're under, maybe the higher that spike goes, and vice versa. But typically you're always going to have a little bit of a spike, no matter how little or how much stress you have in the morning there.
Right. And that's, you said we see, meaning this isn't only a type 1 diabetic thing. The dawn phenomenon is part of the natural cortisol rhythm, as you described, and that's seen in everyone, including non-diabetics, and that's actually funny that you said. I never realized that it was dawn, like dawn of the morning, like in the morning. I thought dawn was the person. And So I actually just learned something there. And as you said that, I quickly looked it up at a PhD, Michael Samoji, and I think in the 30s, 1930s, is the one who coined the phrase. So I thought it was gonna be like a Michael Don that found it at one point. Um, but yeah, so everyone has it, including non-diabetics, which means it's a natural part of it all, right? But like you said, the amount of stress you are under will drastically change the effect. And being type 1 diabetics, either via CGM or just checking your blood sugar, we can see how high our blood sugar gets in the morning. Therefore, we can see the change of how that stress affects us.
Mm. Yeah, and on top of that, like to further illustrate the point that it's not just type 1 diabetics, there's a reason why your doctor, if you're monitoring your high blood pressure, tells you to not check your blood pressure in the morning, to check it actually later, like after you eaten or later on in the day or maybe at night, because typically your blood pressure is actually going to be higher in the morning because of that cortisol spike, just like what we see with our blood sugar.
Mm. So as type 1 diabetics, then what would, the theme of this is to really impact how different things will change our blood sugar to be high and stay high. So the dawn phenomenon is normal, but you said things and like stress will impact that. So does that mean, the background cortisol, if that's already higher, you already have a high output, or does that mean your insulin resistance, if the state of that, or if you're not giving enough insulin, what is that? What are some things that would impact the type 1's dawn phenomenon in the morning?
Yeah, I see, at least with myself, most often, like sleep is probably one of the biggest ones. If I don't get very much sleep and or it's really poor sleep, my dawn phenomenon or my spike in the morning is like twice, if not three times as high, um, as usual. So I know if I don't get very much sleep, like I'll take some extra insulin when I first wake up because I know it's gonna start spiking and I can feel it. Like I can feel, and I'm sure other people do this too. Like when they don't like sleep, let's say like 3 hours or something, um, you can feel like your body is just like tight, like your chest feels tight, or you just feel
Mm-hmm.
like in that stress state. That's your body just like pumping out cortisol, pumping out adrenaline, because it didn't get good sleep. And so now it's on high alert and trying to figure out what the heck's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so sleep is definitely a big one for me. But there's obviously other forms of stress. Obviously, when we say stress, people think of mental, emotional stress. And so obviously that can play a role too. You have
Mm-hmm.
a death of a loved one, or you're going through a divorce or something that's causing extreme stress. Mental, emotional stress can obviously affect that too, because then oftentimes that stuff affects your sleep too. So that those types of things will definitely raise that up quite a bit. But then on the same or on a different side of things, maybe like
Before,
over exercising or too much exercise, or even kind of along the same lines, especially with me in Arizona here, maybe being dehydrated um, because you've been out in the sun all day long, or maybe like too much sun exposure, too much heat exposure, can cause a lot of stress on the body, and end up creating those chronic highs and or severe highs to where it's harder to get down, especially with that down phenomenon.
so I think one thing that I really want to continue the conversation of when you're talking about sleep, I mean, this is your circadian rhythm, right? So this can be plenty of things that impact it outside of your diabetes too. I mean, if you're waking up in the middle of the night, wide awake, I mean, your cortisol rhythm is actually all thrown off.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where, like, as functional medicine providers, or if you're ever able to do like a salvatory test and check your cortisol throughout the day, you might actually not have a dawn phenomenon as a type 1 diabetic, like not a big spike, because maybe you have like no cortisol when you're waking up, because the rhythm of when you have higher cortisol is all jacked up throughout the day. If you're waking up at 2 3 a.m. and you're going to bed at 8 9 10, and you're wide awake at 2 3 unintentionally,
Mm-hmm.
your cortisol might be spiking way earlier, take a while to go back to sleep, and then you're way fatigued because your cortisol is actually not going up, and then you might notice your blood sugar not increasing a significant amount. And so then what's affecting melatonin? How are you going to sleep? All those other things that you mentioned, your hydration status, those things will automatically impact your cortisol levels and therefore impact what you see in terms of a dawn phenomenon.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, sleep is oftentimes one of those things that we don't think a lot about, but when we don't get it, man, our body really screams at us in many different ways. And especially as type 1 diabetics, when we're monitoring our blood sugar and seeing those spikes, we can really see, oh crap, like that wasn't good. I need to get some better sleep.
Right. Exactly. So, the cortisol might be increasing, right? So let's say you are high stress. Let's say you are going through divorce. I thought that was a very interesting but very real example. You're going through divorce and just like, external physical things are happening to you. So you have this increase in cortisol. How might that then affect you throughout the day?
Yeah, so especially with those chronic stressors, like having those mental emotional stressors, like going through a divorce or something like that, typically that's going to keep your body in that stress state. So increasing the cortisol, increasing the adrenaline for a chronic amount of time. So that could be days, that could be weeks, that could be months. And when it's chronically high like that, that's going to keep your blood sugar higher. So ultimately, that leads into for me, when I notice those things, like ultimately you have to change like basal rates or your long acting insulin, because ultimately you're going to be running higher. No matter if you're eating better or eating the same or even exercising more, like those things stay chronically high. And like I've even gone to the point, or experimenting with myself, of like when I'm in those chronically high states, when it's from stress, I'll try to do a bunch of exercise and or maybe eat a little bit less, or change up my diet to see if I can get my basal rate and my need for insulin kind of matched up again. But ultimately, in those stress states, it just takes more insulin because your body just is in that chronically stressed state, kicking out that cortisol and ultimately increasing your blood sugar for throughout the whole day, not just in the morning with that dawn phenomenon, but that dawn phenomenon kicks it off and then it just keeps on going.
Right. Exactly. And it's like when you feel like you have to just keep using more basal rate and more insulin over and over again, it can feel like a losing battle without a doubt, you know. And I think actually one of the things to inspire this was in terms of this topic was exercise. I was talking about exercise at one point because
Yeah.
I mean I've done it where with running, I am stressed, high dawn phenomenon or whatever, and I wake up at like 260, whatever it might be. And I'm supposed to run in the morning. And so I'm like, well, running should bring my glucose down. And then it actually just goes higher. Right.
Yeah.
And well, that's because there's some level of threshold. I would love this to be studied. I don't think there's actually any data on this that I could find, but there has to be some kind of threshold that your body says is like a tipping point of no return. It's like, okay, there's too much going on. Our normal process of GLUT4 activation and having that in our cells to lower our blood sugar isn't enough of a capacity. Like it's the rate of which that can lower your blood sugar isn't enough to combat the stress of cortisol and then glucose production to then make that exercise effective. That might be really technical, but what I mean by that is if you go running and you're high and you get higher, that's because running is a stimulus that will also have cortisol and just makes it a really vicious loop.
Yeah. Yeah. And like to maybe tie that in or give another example with me, like I notice when I do like intermittent fasting or longer fasting, and I try to do like cardio at the end of that fasting. So for me, that would be in the morning. Like I'll get almost always my blood sugar will go down, if not stay the same when I exercise. However, when I do it at the end of a fast before I've eaten, like I notice it will actually spike. And so it
How
essentially
long
what's
of a fast
going
are we
on,
talking
or at
about?
least what's that?
How long of a fast were you talking about?
So at least probably 16 hours.
Okay.
Sometimes, and I've done that with like a 24-hour fast too, and even I
Hmm.
think a 48-hour as well. But Yeah, and it seems like the longer the fast, the steeper the spike or the higher the spike. Because like, in that scenario, my body doesn't have whole lot of stores of energy. And now I'm trying to push it even further and trying to burn even more energy that it doesn't necessarily have. So what's it left to do? All
Mhm.
it has left now is the cortisol and the adrenaline to stimulate the protein breakdown, so that way you can start producing sugar again and give your muscles the energy that they need. And so yeah, in those scenarios specifically, like you're really driving those sympathetics and trying to push your body too hard. Um so yeah, it's all it's left is, hey, we gotta start breaking down that protein, that skeletal muscle, to get you that sugar, and then boom, sugar starts going higher.
And that's a great point. I'm surprised we didn't talk about that in our recent fasting, intermittent fasting episode, because there's a point. I mean, we did it in a way of talking about like diminishing returns, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's a fat point of a fast where your insulin sensitivity will go up, which is true, but you get to a point where you used everything, and then now your body just knows that it needs to pump out cortisol. So there's like this decrease of like, oh, my blood sugar is going to be like fighting low, right? And it's going to be, you're going to be fighting lows a lot. And then all of a sudden you'll get to this point where it's almost like you reach the bottom of the valley, and then it's so much easier to go up a hill in that blood sugar curve because cortisol is so much more primed to be pumped out for multiple reasons, multiple survival reasons, but in how you just described, to break down that protein to still be able to have a constant drip. And since insulin really isn't a part of that equation at that time point in a fast, it just makes it so much more like, what the heck is going on kind of feeling if you're not really familiar on those timelines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like it's the body is such an interesting thing, because you think you understand it in one sense, and then all of a sudden you add a different stimulus or you put it in a different situation and it responds totally different. You're like, this doesn't make any sense. Why is it doing this to me?
Mm-hmm. I actually I talked with a Medtronic rep today, and about some replacing some infusion sets, and uh, she said something that in my head I understood, but something that I don't accept because there's always a reason why you're high. There's always a
Yeah.
reason, but you might just not have the tools. You might have not learned that lesson in physiology. And I get it, not everyone is, you know, has medical training or cares enough for that. But when you're type 1 diabetic, you're forced to care about physiology, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the Medtronic rep said something, if you ever have a unknown high or unexplained high, and blah 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 blah. But she used the phrase of, if you have an unexplained high, and I was like, in my head, I'm like, I know that you mean that like there's some, like, you're just like, oh, my pump failed, or there's something going on. But just like that one book, you are your diabetic experiment. I think that's what the book title is. It's
Oh,
blue.
I think it's My Diabetic Experiment.
Yeah, that was a great book. That's really what got me like inspired to realize that there's always a freaking reason, and so it's just a matter of asking the right questions and having the right team to figure out why something is what it is. But yeah, because cortisol, and just when you're already in a high blood sugar state for various reasons, it will make things so much more complicated and act differently than in a different context.
Yeah. Yeah, the body, I always tell people the body is incredible, but it's also incredibly frustrating.
And we've talked about cortisol a lot, which is related to the adrenal glands. Do you think when it comes to hyperglycemia that um, cortisol gets a bad rap? Is that the only reason why somebody might be at a chronic high?
Yeah, so that's probably the most common thing. But at the same time, obviously there's other factors that go into it. Both from like your liver obviously has a lot to do with your blood sugar regulation. So a lot of liver dysfunction can cause that. And liver dysfunction can come from many different things. That can come from some sort of toxin exposure, from something in your environment, or something in your water, or something you're exposed to on your skin. Then on top of that, you have internal toxins, like let's say you get some sort of parasite infection, or some other infection, and your body's trying to kill that off. Well, all those nasty bugs and parasites, they all carry a bunch of toxins in their body. So when you start killing those things off, they start dumping those toxins. Your body now, your liver has to now process all those toxins. And so that can cause a lot of different blood sugar issues in and of themselves. And then,
Well, let me actually, I think I asked a poor question. What I meant to ask was, which I think you still, in your answer, is what I meant to try to mine out of you. Um, but so if cortisol is such a big impact and people are hearing this, oh, well, my blood sugar is really high, I just need to take some adrenal supplements. My adrenal glands are the reason why I have such issues with high blood sugar and a higher dawn phenomenon. Is that the lesson that somebody should take away as we kind of talk about these nuances, or is there other and you kind of commented on some other reasons why, is the adrenal glands to blame when our dawn phenomenons are so high?
Yeah, not at all. So the adrenal glands are the scapegoat for the body. So everybody likes to blame the adrenal glands, or look at the adrenal glands and say, hey, let's support those so we can reduce the stress on your body. Well, you may be able to help reduce some of the stress by supporting the adrenal glands, but at the same time, you got to figure out, why do the adrenal glands have to do all this work in the first place? And ultimately, that comes down to any type of stressor that's put on your system. We've already talked about, mental emotional stress. Obviously, that can do it. And so in those cases, all right, you have to address those mental emotional stressors. And obviously, that looks different depending on the situation. We've already talked about sleep. So ultimately, getting better sleep, both length and quality of sleep. And then, like I just mentioned, any sort of toxin and or chemical toxin or chemical stressor on your body can greatly impact then your adrenals, and then ultimately your blood sugar. And so that can come like in the form of all those different toxins that I just talked about. That can even come from different internal physiological stressors, like with like even losing weight. So your fat cells store a lot of toxins, and so by losing weight, you may actually see some fluctuations in your blood sugar, because you're now dumping these toxins and they're causing stress on the body. And then at the same time, like let's say you come down with a sinus infection, all those different things can put stress on the body, stress on the immune system, and ultimately then stress on your adrenal glands. And so there's many different ways and many different forms of stress. And that's the hard thing, is like identifying those and and also trying to stay ahead of those things, like trying to identify what stressor is stressing my body and affecting my blood sugar, so then you can actually address that to then mitigate that and cut it off as quick as possible. And that's always the hard part, even for me that knows all this stuff about the human body and about just how your body interacts with your environment. Sometimes it's hard to identify, like, what did I do different, or what did my body get exposed to that for whatever reason I'm now having chronic high blood sugar. So but ultimately, like, getting data, we always preach that, and it's always going to be about that, getting data, not only your blood sugar data, but at the same time, like, even just writing down like a stressor that you felt like probably affected your blood sugar, and then once you addressed it, your blood sugar started to normalize or return back to normal. Like, writing those things down, writing what you felt like before that all started, and that way you can identify before those things start to happen, or when they're starting to happen. So that way you can kind of get ahead of those, both from a like mitigating that stress point of view, but then also from a blood sugar management point of view, maybe increasing your basal rates or decreasing your basal rates to try and head that off at the pass then too.
Yeah, I think when you really start to get the data, and you start to look at it, you can see little differences. And remember, because you're not going to be able to, almost like how a football player memorizes plays. You're not going to be like, oh, this pattern, this play, my body did this play in this scenario. Each play is so significantly different, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if that makes a lot of sense. Or am I frozen right now?
No, you're good.
Okay. I'm not sure if that, what I'm getting by that is, if you only have a few data points, those data points might be similar to another scenario, but no scenario is the same as other. But the more data you have, you're gonna have a better complete picture and see the slight differences. The more you've seen that one pattern before, the more you're like, okay, it should be acting like this, but it's acting, a little bit faster, a little bit slower. What's going on, in that state? And I think an example that so many people, type 1 diabetics, fall into that makes it really hard to combat is when you're sick. When you have an infection. You've mentioned a couple of things. Parasites. I mean, and this time, I mean, I totally feel comfortable saying the word COVID and coronavirus. Like if you get diagnosed with that, or whether it be a sinus infection or bacterial infection, your body is going to be trying to kill that off, right? And seeing how your body acts with one infection versus another might be similar, might be different, but when you're at that, you need to find ways to try to change your insulin sensitivity and your ratios and everything like that to try to support as much as possible. And if you have that data, you can figure that out much faster than you can by just saying, I can't get my blood sugar down. It's my blood sugar is high because this XYZ. What can I do to reduce my stress as much as possible? You
Mm-hmm.
know, I need to be sleeping more. Yeah, I might have a little bit of sickness, but I gotta get in bed an hour and a half earlier. Sorry, guys. If you're husband and wife, please take care of the kids. I need my blood sugar to be under control. You just need to be able to identify those things so much faster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then ultimately, like you said, also know what strategies help mitigate those the best. So whether that's sleep or belly breathing or some sort of breath work or meditation or addressing those infections with herbs or medications or whatever. Ultimately trying to identify what is really effective for your body as far as reducing stress. And all those different stressors are probably going to be a little bit different. So, you know, like with sickness, you have, a set of things that help you get over that sickness faster: sleeping, hydration, maybe a herb or supplement that you really like that seems to help knock it out faster. Having those strategies ahead of time, and or first of all creating those and learning those is helpful. So that way, like I said, you can get through that faster, and that way you don't have to deal with all the blood sugar headaches as long.
And so, and think about it this way too, like the more you understand about it, the better you can say yes or no to other therapies that are suggested to you, right? Like cortisol is a hormone. We're talking about it as a hormone, but it's known as glucocorticoid, which is a steroid.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, it's, especially if you have a practitioner working with you that doesn't know you're type 1, doesn't care that you're type 1, they just might be like, you need to be on a steroid. And there could be a variety of reasons why you need to be on that steroid. But if you don't take it in account, your cortisol is already high, your blood sugars are kind of like wonky. Taking that steroid, an oral steroid, or maybe even like a corticosteroid injection, that might be that might flare up your blood sugar so much more, and then you are in that high state until you're off of those medications. um and that's something to recognize too, that there's so many things out there that we might think, oh, we're talking about cortisol so much, but there's so many things that will do a similar pattern. And unless you are able to identify with data that's like, oh, this is this play, that you're not going to be able to say yes or no or act accordingly to what's happening in your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's another one we didn't necessarily mention. which is physical stress. Yes, like exercise or over exercise can cause stress, but at the same time, like pain causes stress. And so obviously, if you've gotten to the point where you need, or you've gone to a doctor and they tell you you need a steroid injection of some sort, well, you've probably already been in a stress state for a long period of time because you've been in so much pain to get you to that point to go and see that doctor. So your blood sugar's probably already been chronically high, and now you add a steroid into that, you're probably going to have even more of a problem, or a even higher blood sugar as a result of that. So, yeah, so that's another thing to think about too, is if you're seeking that sort of treatment, you got to be aware of those things ahead of time. And or I mean, I think it's always a good practice to, if somebody's giving you some sort of treatment, whether it be natural or medication or whatever, like ask them, is this going to affect my blood sugar? Do you expect this to affect my blood sugar in any way? Because then at the very least, that helps them recognize or remember the fact that you're type 1 diabetic. Because I mean, doctors are human. They forget. They see a lot of patients, and so it's easy to forget maybe that you're type 1. And so it kind of reminds them, oh yeah, this probably will. So you might want to, increase your frequency of checking or whatever the case may be. But always ask that, because that just helps educate you and maybe even your decision making on whether you want to do that therapy or not. And ultimately help you manage your blood sugar better, because you're aware, hey, this might actually change it, so I'm going to be checking it a little bit more to see how it changes it.
Yeah, it all comes into play. I mean, almost taking all this information in. I'll kind of talk about a case really fast from yesterday, or I guess the past few days. As a chiropractor, a patient came into me sometimes for headaches, migraines, and this person just got back from Ireland. It's been like a trip, 3 years in the planning. Has plenty of other physical stresses, but is a type 2 diabetic. And I saw them twice on Thursday and Friday last week, and with a credible migraine. They're taking all this prescription medication because it was that bad. And then Friday didn't, adjusting her C1 and her upper cervical spine had some impact, but not a whole lot. And because it was still there. And then on Monday, it went down a little bit more, where she's not taking the prescription medicine. But, I started talking about it on Monday. I'm like, okay, well, we'll adjust your spine again, but tell me about your blood sugar. How's your blood sugar been with this headache? And like, oh, it's just been super high. And so this could be like a chicken or egg. Did her stress from the headache cause her blood sugar high, or vice versa, right? She just got back from Ireland, traveling on a plane, probably not eating the same things. And I was like, okay, we need to really dial in your nutrition right now. And I advise her to take some berberine to kind of help with her insulin sensitivity. But I was like, we need to get you more water. We need to change your, get your diet back under control. And that is absolute, I can't say with 100% certainty, but as seeing her as a person, as a whole person, it's like, we need to be addressing this while we're working on your headache, or else, your upper cervical spine will continue to be fixated, whatever else. And so,
yeah, I mean, headaches in general, like I get headaches. That's one of my telltale signs when I'm really high, is I start getting a headache. So like if you're not addressing the blood sugar, not only that may be causing it, but at the same time, like that's putting more stress on your body, and in a sense, it's not going to allow your body to heal very efficiently. No matter if that's just like a structural thing or even internal stuff, is not going to heal very well when your blood sugar is high. That's why we see, amputations and or, foot ulcers and stuff with diabetics, is because, you're not going to heal very well when your blood sugar is high.
exactly. So, I mean, just it all plays into one another. And if you think being type 1 diabetic is a walk in the park, you're thinking about all this at the same time, or, or trying to, and I'm not even going to say you should, but, but you don't know what you don't know, right? I mean, your resources are your resources. And so just trying to think about everything all at once, like, and does aspirin really help your headache go away, or does it just dampen it for you to feel it, or not feel it as much, but those stimulants that are causing the headache is still there, right? So it's like, but then again, at the same time, pain science, we were talking about briefly about pain, right? So at any sense, pain will increase your blood sugar, especially if you're having for a long time. So maybe there is some you know, some merit to taking some kind of cox inhibitor in some kind of pain management at that point. But, you know, taking a bigger 30,000 foot view, you know, what affects your blood sugar, and when your blood sugar is high, it's so much more than just trying to mask your pain, but address your pain. Those are two different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, it's like you said, it's a chicken or the egg thing, and ultimately you got to look at yourself as a whole person and try to address as much as you can address um comprehensively, because otherwise everything, like if you just do one thing, your results are going to be limited. But if you do um everything you can to address all the different factors, you're probably going to have a lot more success.
Mm-hmm. And just to continue with more scenarios, right? It's like, what if you had, you know, actually adrenal issue like Cushing syndrome, or, you know, there's so many aspects to health conditions, health states, disease, all these things that will play into one another. And it's just, you know, it's all a circle. It's all going to affect one another, and then can affect it by just having, you know, insulin sensitivity and resistance change, but it can also be affected by slowing your digestion. And then you eat food, and then you're eating food that's not necessarily best for you, and it's continuing to impact your digestion. We talked about digestion a handful of times, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you have slower fast motility, that'll drastically change what's happening to your blood sugar, right?
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, those classes of diabetic drugs that specifically their goal is for you to not absorb your food as much, so it doesn't impact your blood sugar as much. You know, totally different viewpoint of how you should affect your blood sugar. But if you're only looking at your blood sugar as like, what are things we can do to impact this, it's not a bad idea if your sole goal was to minimize blood sugar, you know, chronicity and chronic hyperglycemia. But at the same time, you don't want to not be absorbing your food.
Yeah.
um, it's a little bit of a tangent there, but you get my point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, blood sugar is one of those things that affects pretty much everything in your body, while at the same time, there's so many different things that also affect your blood sugar. So it's one of those crucial things. And then that's why I've always kind of looked at diabetes as somewhat of a blessing, in the sense that it gives you a great window into how your body's working, because if it's being affected, it tells you something. Whether it's going lower, maybe it tells you that, hey, what I'm doing is doing something good because my insulin sensitivity is better. If it's going higher, you're like, okay, something's wrong. Something's affecting my blood sugar, and ultimately, then that high blood sugar is going to be affecting other things. And we've talked about how blood sugar affects a lot of different organ systems, like you said, digestion, but then also it also affects all your other different hormones in the body, because it has a great effect on the hypothalamic pituitary communication. So that's basically the brain and how it communicates to the pituitary gland. And your pituitary gland is essentially what controls all your hormones in your body, especially sex hormones and even your adrenals. And so when you have chronically high blood sugar, or just acutely high blood sugar, that can affect all your hormones. So you end up producing less of your sex hormones, more of your cortisol and stress hormones, less of your thyroid hormones, and all those things are really important in your overall function in the body. So, taking care of your blood sugar, both in the acute state and also obviously in the chronic state, is really important for basically all your different organ systems in your body.
Absolutely. I mean, even the hot buttons, the hot topics of thyroid. Everyone thinks about thyroid and weight loss and things like that. But if your blood sugar is chronically high, affecting your pituitary gland, which is your master endocrine gland, I mean, it's going to be affecting all those things, including your thyroid, including your sex hormones, including your cortisol output. You know, it becomes I'm pretty sure there's even a positive feedback loop in that sense of cortisol with I forgot the actual mechanism, but I know every now and then there's a positive feedback loop, and I think cortisol can be one of them. But that's besides the point. Positive feedback loop typically meaning, oh, if you have more of something, it's going to end up creating more of that same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Simply put. And so it'll affect everything. I mean, sex hormones, estrogen, follicle stimulating hormone, prolactin, testosterone, all those things. It's going to affect those in men and women, in various ages, depending on where you are. If you're female, a cyclical female versus a young man versus an old man versus a menopause woman, it's going to still affect those things and impact everything else, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. How many people do you see that are on hormone replacement therapy, like on the female side of things for like cycles and menopause, and then on the male side of things for low testosterone, so energy levels, recovery, mental clarity, and who is addressing their blood sugar dysregulation?
Mm-hmm.
It's not being addressed. And so
Right.
if you fix that, I mean, you put your body in a much better place to then be able to produce those by itself. um, so it's just interesting, how much that blood sugar will affect everything. And even something we haven't talked about, well, we've probably talked about in previous podcasts, but um, your brain, like your brain function is greatly affected by your blood sugar, especially like memory and stuff like that. Chronically high, especially where we see blood sugar and also cortisol greatly affects your hippocampus, which is basically your memory centers. So basically short-term memory and turning that into long-term memory. Um,
Mm-hmm.
those things are greatly affected by both blood sugar and cortisol. So when you have both of those high and chronically high, that's not a good scenario for your brain. And ultimately, that's one of those mechanisms or one of those reasons why Alzheimer's is considered type 3 diabetes, because blood sugar can greatly affect your brain.
Right. It literally changes the morphology, like the actual shape of your hippocampus.
Mm-hmm.
It changes the receptor. It's crazy the impact that both cortisol and hyperglycemia has on your hippocampus and your memory. So it affects your brain health, affects your sex health, it affects endocrine hormones and other hormones. It'll affect your energy, it'll affect your responsiveness to insulin, which will affect your metabolism. That, if you're chronically high, your electrolytes will be off, energy will be low. It's just such an important factor. And I think that's why probably both you and I and a lot of functional medicine practitioners, blood sugar is like a foundation. It's like that needs to be control and part of the target. Um, if you're evaluating somebody, because if that is not under control, it's gonna be really, really, really hard to get at some deeper level things or deeper level symptoms if that's not even functioning properly, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like I can give you an herb to help with your liver function, or I can give you a supplement to help with your brain function. But if your blood sugar is all out of whack, like there's only so much that herb or that supplement can do, to mitigate what's damaging that organ system. But if you address those foundational things, and blood sugar is definitely one of those things, now your body's in a place to where it can heal efficiently and work efficiently, to where now when we give you that supplement or that herb, it can be much more effective and you actually feel a noticeable change,
Mm.
versus when you're not addressing those foundational things, you may not feel much of a change at all.
Right. I mean, and that's why that, if you see those comments on social media posts, I look at Instagram a lot, but I'm sure there are other where, whether it's CMOS, you have type 1 diabetes, take CMOS, take cinnamon, whatever,
Cinnamons.
or, even if you might see comments that are like taking zinc and all these other things, those elements, those things might affect your blood sugar. However, it's not getting at the root of issues, right? And that's why that's all bullshit. That's why
Yeah.
it's like, don't talk to me. This is more complex than just taking one little herb, taking one little thing, and adding it to your life. It's how is my life different? What do I need to do to change my lifestyle? And how I'm moving through the world and how the world around me is acting and changing my blood sugar. That's really why it's so hard and why those comments are bullshit and annoying. Well, it's annoying because it's annoying, but
Yeah.
it's I mean, it's not, there is no one key cure, but rather there is only, you have to look at yourself as a whole, get the information, and try to correct as much of that as you can at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, blood sugar and stress, basically the two topics that we're trying to really nail down in this episode, are basically the most affected by diet and lifestyle. Like, you're not going to take a whole lot of herbs or supplements, like it's going to greatly affect those things until you address the lifestyle stuff. If you've got that nailed down, now those herbs or those supplements can be a little bit more effective. But until you get those lifestyle changes figured out, like, you're gonna be very limited on how much you can progress through those issues. So there, I can't harp on it enough with especially with blood sugar. Like, we can give you metformin and berberine all day long, but like, ultimately you have to make the tough choices every moment of every day to progress yourself forward, making those hard choices of, choosing the right foods, making sure you're getting movement throughout the day and exercise, and burning off that excess glucose, and or creating that insulin sensitivity. Otherwise, man, it's going to be hard.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah, and then on top of that, like, with the stress side of things, like, if you're not sleeping, like, your body can't get out of that stress state. Or if you're drinking mugs and mugs or pots and pots of coffee, like, your body's constantly in the sympathetic mode. Like, you
Right.
can't rest and relax and start healing. And so you gotta address those things. Otherwise, you can take all the popular supplements or adrenal herbs you want. Like, you're not going to get the results you want until you start making the decisions that you don't necessarily want to make to get those results.
Right. And just like anything, you can make these changes today. You can make these changes tomorrow. If you're a veteran diabetic and, maybe you had the condition for like 20 years and really haven't taken control of it, you can't allow yourself to be have negative self-talk, because that's in itself a stress. But negative self-talk about what you didn't do for your diabetes yesterday, but rather rejoice in what you can do today, what you can do in the future, regarding this condition, because it's, you can see changes in this really kind of fast sometimes, and some of the things we've talked about, you can see it immediately. Sometimes you can see it in, over the course of a couple of days. But this kind of stuff, doing this over and over again, is what impacts you in the long term, right? And it's like, being diabetic, we have a higher chance of Alzheimer's. We have a higher chance of so many other, our mortality rate goes up through the roof, right? I saw every now and then a study comes in to play when you have more exogenous insulin, how there might be an increased risk of certain types of cancers. Like, but that being said, you see and hear those things, and that's another thing to fear. I mean, that's a statistic, but doesn't mean that you need to be a statistic. That means, what can I do today to maybe try to avoid some of those things? And at the end of the day, all we can do is all we can do, So, and you can maybe not like working out because you were weightlifting with a friend and you and your friend aren't on good terms anymore. And so weightlifting is a bad taste in your mouth, and it's hard to control your blood sugar without that. But hell, you can focus on the sleep. You can focus on restful, being mindful, belly breathing, like you said, diaphragmatic breathing. When you're chronically high, things will end up bad. But when you actively combat being chronically high, your life will automatically start ticking towards a better endpoint.
Yeah, like, it's all about consistency, and it's all about, like, just taking that next step forward and continuing to get better and better. Like, obviously, your life happens, you're going to have setbacks, but at the same time, if you keep moving forward, keep trying to do better, and try to be as consistent as you can. Consistency is the name of the game, whether you're diabetic or not. If you can stay in a healthy state for a long period of time or a large percentage of the time, your body is going to be really set up to have a good and long life, both in length, but then at the same time in quality. That's ultimately, I think, our goals as diabetics is to not have those severe complications at the end of life. And that starts right now. Whether
Mhm.
you're 12 years old, 5 years old, 20 years old, 40 years old, it doesn't matter. It starts right now. And the better you do now, the better you do tomorrow, the better you do the next day, the better you're going to feel when you get into your later years, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. Those years can be good. It just takes a lot of dedication, a lot of consistency right now.
Let's freaking go. Absolutely. You know what? I would love if cameras are even a thing in that time frame, but I would love to reach 100 years old, be a centenarian, and like have a picture of like me taking like using a pricker, using like a lancet to prick my blood sugar and have just a little bit of a bead and just like flicking off the camera of just be like, I made it to triple digits and with this condition, you
Yep.
know, and hopefully, by doing the right things or the quality is there. Sometimes the duration can't be controlled. There are accidents, life will happen. But by doing these things, we can live the best possible life. And that's really what we all want, to live the best possible life for ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah, you hear about I think everybody as a type 1 diabetic and even as a type 2 diabetic, you hear about the horror stories of people, losing limbs or losing organs because of their poor regulation of their blood sugar throughout, their whole life. And I mean, I had that growing up. My grandpa didn't control his blood sugar very well, and he had, toes amputated, and then eventually both of his legs amputated, several fingers. And I'm just like, and then when I got the condition, like it was scary. Like I thought that was going to be me. And then learning more and more that it's all about how you control it and how you take care of it. That's why I'm as focused and as consistent and as dedicated and as psychotic about this stuff as possible, because I don't want to end up like that. I don't want to end up in a wheelchair when I'm 50 or 60 because of my blood sugar.
Right. Well, I empower you, Grady, and empower everyone else to take that moment of saying, hey, these things can happen. You could maybe end up in a wheelchair, but rather, empower us to think about what can we do? What what is waiting for us as we take care of ourselves, as we learn as much as we can, as we take our chronic highs and make them, chronic stables. That's an awful. I wish that was a little bit better of a off the cuff comment, but as we make it more, level and balanced and in range, as we work towards these things, empower us to think about the positive side of things, not just a fear of avoidance, but rather embracing the possibilities that are in front of us, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so let's maybe end it with, I have a couple different things that might be interesting. So
mhm.
let's talk about maybe like a goal that we want to be able to do later in life that maybe a lot of people don't think they'll be able to do because of this condition, or even because they're too old to do it. Um, and then maybe like a goal age that you want to live to.
Mm. Well, I mean, I'd love to be triple digits. I'd love to be 100. I don't think anyone in my relatively close family tree has been a centenarian. And even with like some Mediterranean descent and Italian heritage in my family, I don't think anyone that I can think of has made it to that. So, that's not, it would be really cool to be 100 years old
Mhm.
and just even with this condition, just be like, yeah, that wasn't a factor, no factor,
Yep.
to that. Um, I guess 100 is probably a really easy point to be like, that's a cool number. I want to get to that. Do you have
Mhm.
like a more realistic goal, or do you have more of like, not that that's not realistic, but do you have a more non uh non low hanging fruit answer than 100 years old?
Yeah, so I want to be 106. The reason why I want to be 106 is because that'll put me into the next century. So I will have lived through or lived in, would that be 3 centuries? Because I was
Oh,
born in
sure.
1994 and
Hmm.
now I'm in this century. If I can make it to that next century, that'd be really cool.
That's a great reason to be 106. It makes a lot of sense. What about you? What is something that you'd like to be able to do as a type 1 diabetic later on in life?
I think there's two things, at least that stick in my mind right now. Definitely one of those things is golf because golf is a retirement sport, so I want to be able to golf basically until I die. Um, and then on top of that, maybe a little bit more of a zealous goal is to be able to do some sort of grappling, probably going to be like jujitsu or something later in life. That probably won't. I probably won't be doing that when I'm 100, but um,
Mhm.
to be able to do that like 70, 80 even would be pretty cool.
Hmm. Well, I think, talking about sports, it'd be cool to be, in your seventh, eighth decade of life and still at the gym, still lifting something. You
Yeah.
know, I always get so jacked when, even if it's like a 15-pound dumbbell, a 10-pound dumbbell, when I see somebody in that type of decade lifting. And as a type 1 diabetic to do that, that's even more empowering. But I'll take a step off that path and say, I want to be able to see my kids and grandkids and maybe great grandkids. I mean, if I'm living that age, I want to be able to see those generations and be a type 1 diabetic. And who knows, maybe at that point that can, they keep saying, oh, they're going to cure type 1 diabetes, but maybe that will be a thing of the past. Like you literally have an extinct, a non-existent condition to your great grandkids. You know, what a interesting and cool thought. But I want to be able to see, have my eyes. I want to be able to
Yeah.
give a hug. That's probably a more realistic, goal of somebody who's 80, 90, 100 years old. I want to be able to do all those things.
Mm-hmm.
And age is hard. Once you get to like age 65, 75, it's like dramatic, declines of life. But I think, if we always have this perspective and always working on it, why the hell not, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Amen, brother.
Well, um those are the two questions, right, that,
Mm-hmm.
that you wanted to end on. Okay, well, for kind of we did our closing questions, but I just wanted to take another moment to say, if anyone who is battling a chronic high, we're talking about a lot of things very casually, but we talked about things casually to keep it light. But these conversations, these learning curves, going through these, you don't have to go through it alone. You can have a team of some kind with you, and just continue to work on the best version of you. And I appreciate, and both Grady and I appreciate your ears, sharing the season, even if it's a shorter season, and just being you, just appreciating you, not even sharing the podcast, but just appreciating you as
Mm-hmm.
as somebody with ears listening to this.
Yeah. Yeah. I share that sentiment. I definitely even though we don't have a ton of listeners, I definitely love being able to connect with people that I haven't even really met yet. And at the same time, hopefully, people feel um, open enough to be able to reach out to us if they do need help and or if they just want to connect and um, and talk blood sugar stuff or talk life stuff or how do we navigate certain things. It's just nice to have that community, have that team effort, and try to beat this and conquer this disease, and kick it into the dirt.
That's right. Well, we will end the Midwestern goodbye at that. We're saying goodbye in so many ways and so many appreciations. But that's I'll say that's it for now. And We'll catch you next time on the Die Buddies podcast.
See ya.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found value in today's conversation, we would appreciate it if you gave a 5-star review. It really helps us branch out our community and get our message across to those who really need to hear it. If you want to interact with us on social media, you can follow us on the Die Buddies podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Or if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or moral outrages, you can email us at thediebuddyspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks.